Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. Israel's Prime Minister is reported to be considering expanding military operations in Gaza, despite growing domestic criticism, including many former defence chiefs. Amber alert and train cancellations as Storm Flores hits part of the UK, with a danger to life warning in Scotland. Health experts warn plastic pollution is a grave danger to health and is also costing the world at least $1.5 trillion a year. And they're described as the most beautiful snails in the world. We hear from the scientists trying to save them. Now, reports from Western Sudan say the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces have handed over control of the massive Zamzam camp for displaced people to Colombian mercenaries. A spokesman for the camp in Darfur has described seeing armed Spanish-speaking groups moving around freely. Well, let's talk to our Africa correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher. And Barbara, tell us more then about these mercenaries.
Well, Matthew, we've been hearing for some time that there are Colombian mercenaries fighting alongside the RSF. I think the initial reports were late last year from a Colombian website, which said that around 300 mercenaries, which had been recruited by a private security agency, were fighting in Sudan. And now it seems that they have been involved in the battles for El Fasher. This is that big city in western part of Sudan, which has been under siege by the RSF for more than a year. And the army has said that in recent fighting at the weekend, a number of the Colombian soldiers were killed. Armed allies of the military, armed groups that are fighting alongside the military, went further. They said that 80 Colombian mercenaries had been killed, along with other foreign fighters who are supporting the RSF. And also, it seems there have been sightings of them in this camp for displaced people at the edge of El Fasher. That's the Zamzam camp. It's the biggest IDP camp in Sudan. Now, the RSF seized that camp in April, and almost everybody fled. And now the camp spokesman is saying he's seen video of the Spanish-speaking soldiers walking around freely in the camp. He claims this means that they are occupying it, or that the RSF is occupying it through these Colombian mercenaries. But I have to say, Matthew, that the wider picture is, one, that the fighting for El Fasher has really intensified in recent weeks and months, and more people have been fleeing these bombardments and the drone strikes. More than 1 million people have actually left El Fasher and the camps since the siege started in April 2024. And two, those who are left in El Fasher, about 300,000 people it's estimated, basically don't have food. Local activists are reporting that the markets are empty, almost empty. Anything there is way too expensive to buy. People are eating animal feed in order to survive, and that they're facing starvation.
And of course, the numbers, as you said, in the middle of that answer, are absolutely huge in terms of not just those killed, but those displaced. In terms of humanitarian efforts to actually get in to help, where are we with those?
So there was an attempt in early June for an aid convoy. It was a joint convoy with the World Food Programme and the UN Children's Agency to try to get into El Fasher. My understanding is that they had agreement from both sides to let them in, but they were attacked. And 5 people in that convoy were killed, 2 trucks were destroyed. Now, the RSF and the Sudanese army blame each other for that attack. But that just shows how dangerous and difficult it is to try to just get the basics in. We're not talking just food, of course, we're talking medicine. Many of the medical facilities have been hit in the fighting, as well as other services that could help people. So I think the aid agencies are looking at other opportunities to try to get aid into El Fasher, but they would have to have agreement from both sides for safe passage, and that is very, very difficult to guarantee. Those who fled Zamzam, Matthew, many of them have ended up in a place about 60 kilometers away from El Fasher, in a place called Tawila. There is access for humanitarian agencies, and they have been trying to help, although the need is immense. And the other problem they're having is cholera. There's a cholera sweep across Sudan, more than 90,000 cases reported, and just in this area of North Darfur, some 2,000 cases have been reported. So the situation is very, very dire, and it keeps getting worse as time goes on.
Barbara Plett-Usher, thanks for bringing us right up to date. Thank you. Now here, an extra £100 million is being promised by the UK government to target criminal gangs organising small boat crossings of migrants. The money will be used to fund returns agreements with France, as well as up to 300 additional National Crime Agency officers. The Conservatives say ministers have no serious plan to actually stop the boats. Here's our correspondent, Simon Jones.
Crossings at record levels. More than 25,000 people have reached the UK on small boats so far this year. When Labour came to power more than a year ago, it warned that smashing the gangs organising the journeys would not be quick and easy to do. It insists it has developed a serious and comprehensive plan to protect the UK's border. Now it's announced there will be an extra £100 million to tackle illegal immigration. That will help pay for up to 300 extra National Crime Agency officers and new technology and equipment.
Will there be a deal on small boats today?
There will also be funding for a pilot scheme agreed last month by the Prime Minister and the French President. The one-in, one-out deal will see some migrants arriving in Dover sent back to France in exchange for asylum seekers with links to Britain coming here.
This is a pilot scheme. We are seeking to learn from it. At the moment, we're not in a position from a standing start to be able to return absolutely everybody. The details of that will be set out in due course, but this is a pilot scheme which I hope we will be able to operationalise and change as we go along.
A former head of the Border Force told me a much bigger removal scheme, like the previous government's plan to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda, is needed.
Extra funding is always useful for law enforcement agencies. National Crime Agency and the Border Security Command will be very pleased, I think, that they're getting this additional money, but remains to be seen how much of an impact that will actually have on small boat arrivals.
Why do you say that?
Because I think what we need to do, in addition to smashing the gangs, is create a removals deterrent, so the migrants themselves know that when they arrive in the UK, they will not automatically be granted temporary admission into a hotel.
The government wants to see more successes like these. 25 dangerous dinghies seized from a lorry at the border between Turkey and Bulgaria last week, part of an international operation involving the National Crime Agency. Protests over immigration continued at the weekend. This was outside a hotel housing asylum seekers in Canary Wharf in London. The Conservatives have described the latest government announcement as a desperate grab for headlines, which will make no real difference. It says people arriving illegally should be detained and deported. Simon Jones.
Well, that was Simon Jones. Well, at a news conference earlier, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage suggested his own plan to curb immigration.
All around the world, if you enter a country illegally, you will be detained and deported. This is what normal countries do all over the world. We've surrendered normality to this new human rights regime. So if you come to Britain via that route, you will never be given refugee status. You will never be given permanent leave to remain. You will not be free to walk the streets.
Well, those comments came as his party gained its first police and crime commissioner following a defection from the Conservatives. The police boss for Leicestershire and Rutland accused both Labour and the Conservatives of failing the country.
We need to cut the dark heart of wokeness out of our criminal justice system and allow the police and courts to get back to what they're supposed to be doing, which is keeping our communities safe.
Well, our chief political correspondent Henry Zeffman was at that news conference and gave us his assessment.
Nigel Farage unveiling a defection from the Conservatives at local level. So Rupert Matthews has been the Police and Crime Commissioner for Leicestershire since 2021. That means supervising the work of the police there. He talked, Rupert Matthews, that is, about how he believed that a Reform UK government could cut the dark heart of wokeness out of our police and crime system, and said he was concerned that as things stand, the UK was on course to become like Lebanon and Libya, by which he meant, I think, sort of failed states. Look, I think the real significance of this is that sort of growing sense that the institutional Conservative Party is fraying, and the kinds of people who not very long ago, I mean in Rupert Matthews' case, literally this morning, wanted to be Conservative office holders now want to be Reform UK office holders. You've seen a few defections at other levels. You've also, of course, saw at the local elections in England in May, Reform UK gain control of various English councils which were previously controlled by the Conservatives. And I think more than anything particular to do with Rupert Matthews or anything particular he said today, it just adds to the sense on the right of British politics that Reform UK is the growing force and the Conservative Party is the fading force.
Well, that was Henry Zefferman. Now, health experts are warning that plastic pollution is a grave and little recognised threat to health. A new review says plastics causes death from infancy to old age. It also highlights the danger from invisible microplastics that have found their way into our bodies. Let's speak now to Professor Richard Thompson, a marine biologist from Plymouth University, who's leading a group of scientists finalising the Global Plastics Treaty, a legally binding international agreement to end plastic pollution. Professor, welcome here to the programme. I'll come to the treaty in a moment, but your press release says plastics are, quote, a grave, growing and under-recognised danger to human and planetary health. So start by telling us how grave.
I believe that was a press release launched around a paper published in The Lancet today. It's not a paper that I'm a co-author of, but I've read it. It doesn't alarm me, but its findings are, of course, alarming, that as humans are exposed to plastic pollution from the womb throughout our lives, and that those exposures can result in a wide range of adverse human health effects, the effects of that plastic pollution, including diabetes, coronary heart disease, adverse effects on development and growth. Those costs, the costs of these exposures could be in excess of $1.5 trillion a year, the paper published today in The Lancet estimates. And so it really kind of illustrates the immense externalized costs of our current methods of plastic production. We tend to think that plastics are inexpensive materials, but when you take into account all of these externalized costs on society, not just the litter, but also these effects on human health, it really evidences why we need to take action to prevent plastic pollution right the way along the supply chain.
We're seeing pictures as you're speaking of some of the pollution that plastics cause in all manner of different walks of life. But in terms of plastic production, how much has that grown over the decades?
It's grown immensely. I mean, it's grown 200-fold since 1950. In the 1950s, we were producing about 5 million tons of plastic globally. We're currently producing well in excess of 400 million tons. And the problem is that the majority of those plastics are single-use items, where the benefit to society, if there is a benefit, is relatively short-lived. But of course, the persistence as waste or as litter is incredibly long-lived. So over time, the amount of plastics we're producing is rapidly escalating away from our abilities to manage that waste. And that's why we need to take what I would call upstream solutions. It's not a problem that we can just address through better waste management alone. That's going to be part of the picture, but we need to take upstream solutions starting from the design stage to make sure we're producing safer and more sustainable plastics in the first place, but also ensuring that those plastics bring essential benefit to society. And there I just illustrate the example of the microbeads in cosmetics that we've seen legislation in the UK to prohibit. That was hundreds of thousands of tons of plastic every year. I haven't heard of a single consumer complain that they can no longer scrub themselves with millions of small pieces of plastic every morning. So there's clearly things we make of plastics in plastic that are not needed.
You were talking about plastic pollution, but microplastics that we ingest, you touched upon it just there, but how much do we know about the harm potentially that is doing?
We know that microplastics cause harm to a wide range of species in laboratory studies. We know that microplastics are in the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. So we're not immune to that exposure. I mean, in my view, as a biologist, we're just another species. So we can't expect to be immune from the same kinds of effects of microplastics that we've seen in laboratory studies. And indeed, there's emerging evidence of association with coronary heart disease, for example, and a range of other ill health effects from the microplastics. But I think it's important to take the matter of health effects in the round, including not just the particles of microplastic, but the associated chemicals, which we've known for the potential for harmful effects since the 1970s. So in some respects, this isn't new, but the problem has escalated because we've failed to address it.
Yes. So a global treaty, let's come to that. What realistically could you actually hope for? What is the best case scenario of things practically we could do as we're talking now?
Yeah, and let's be clear, as a scientist, I'm here as an observer. I'm not one of the negotiating teams. It will be up to the politicians and the ministers to negotiate the treaty. My role in this is to try to put before them the best available independent scientific evidence that's free of conflicts of interest. There's no formal mechanism within the UN to deliver that. And so regrettably, there's a lot of misinformation that's spreading and causing doubt amongst the negotiators. So I'm here as an independent scientist. I'm a member of the Scientists Coalition for an Effective Plastics Treaty. There's over 450 of us now worldwide in 65 countries. There's 60 of us on the ground here in Geneva, speaking multiple languages, trying to guide the negotiators towards an ambitious treaty.
But in terms of that guidance, what decisive action could be taken now? And actually, you know what is happening. So many of the global issues come back to one man, Donald Trump. One of the first things he did was to get rid of recyclable straws and go back to plastic straws. So that is where we're at with the US. So what decisive action could we hope for here with a treaty?
The US is but one country. Of course, it's very disappointing to hear those remarks. And I think those remarks miss the point, really. My point would be, do we need a single-use throwaway straw, whether it's made of plastic or of paper? In many instances, probably we don't. So what we need here is negotiators to agree on an ambitious treaty that will set out the path towards producing only plastics that are essential, that bring clear benefit to society because of these immense external costs we've talked about. And for those plastics where there's a clear societal benefit, we need to develop criteria to make sure that those plastics are safer and more sustainable than they are at present. In terms of the safety, you could point to the 16,000 different chemicals that are associated with plastic production. Over 4,000 of those are known to be harmful, but very few are regulated under existing treaties. So it's going to be absolutely critical that this treaty on plastic pollution includes chemicals as part of its mandate.
Yes.
That addresses the safety. And then if we think about the sustainability, that's not only going to be using less plastics, but it's also going to be designing the plastics that we do need to make sure that they're compatible either with reuse formats or with circularity via recycling. And once again, chemical simplification, reducing that number of 16,000 chemicals, could greatly help increase what is abysmal rates of recycling that we see at the moment, below about 10%. So it has to start from the design stage. There are some here with low ambition that would like to turn this into a waste management treaty. It's clear that our ability to manage the waste is falling way below the levels of production, and production is set to triple over the next few decades unless we take action. So we do need to produce less plastics, but I'd argue the way to do that is to make sure that the plastics we produce are firstly essential, and then for those essential plastics, they're safer and more sustainable. So those are the things I'd like to see in the treaty. And I'd like to see it also mandated that it will be guided by an independent science body, a science body that's free of conflicts of interest to help with the implementation of that treaty.
We shall see what is eventually agreed. But thank you for taking time to speak to us. Thanks so much.
Not at all. Thank you.
We're going to take a short break. Around the world and across the UK. You are watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Now, snails may not be something you'd think of as being beautiful, but one species found only in the forests of Cuba has been described as the most striking in the world because of its colourful shell. That, though, makes them vulnerable as collectors and traders want to use them as decorative objects. Well, now researchers are working on ways to protect them, as our science correspondent, Victoria Gill, now reports.
These are Polymeter snails, described by some mollusk experts as the most beautiful snails in the world, found only in the forests of Cuba. But while they're increasingly rare in the wild, it's remarkably easy to buy their shells online.
So I'm surprised that when we look online here, we can see a lot of Polymeter shells for sale in the UK.
These shells are bought and sold as beautiful decorative objects, but each of these was once a living animal.
How much of a concern is this, seeing them for sale?
And for some of these species, we know they're really quite endangered. So it wouldn't take much for somebody to collect them in Cuba and to trade them, for then it could cause some species to go extinct.
So snail biologists are racing to study and to try to conserve these creatures before they disappear from the wild.
Welcome to Nottingham's Snail Lab.
Here at the University of Nottingham's School of Life Sciences, evolutionary geneticists are analysing samples of the Polymeter snail DNA, decoding the animal's biological blueprint. They want to know how many different species there are, how they're related to each other, and what part of their genetic code gives them their extraordinary, unique colour patterns.
Hola, Bernardo. ¿Cómo estás?
Bien, muy bien. The researchers here are working closely with their colleagues in Cuba. There, they've embarked on the challenging task of breeding the snails in captivity.
Look at this. This is the snail.
Wow.
They are here for 5 months, and at the moment, almost all adults.
Wow.
It is difficult because we have many blackouts, but they are doing well.
With just a little bit of tissue from one of those snails, we can start to mine information from the genome of the snails. This is a project of 2 parts where my colleagues in Cuba are trying to understand the basics of biology, where the snails are, all kinds of questions to do with that. And then the genetic information that we can then bring in can also ultimately contribute to the conservation.
It's illegal to take Polymeter snails or their shells out of Cuba, but it is legal to sell the shells elsewhere. The researchers hope that understanding their biological secrets and raising the Polymeter's profile will help keep these colourful creatures in the forests where they belong. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
Fascinating. Let's speak to Dave Clark from the Zoological Society of London. Dave, welcome here to the programme. I gather that you were involved in fieldwork in Cuba on this. So tell me a little more about what you did.
Yeah, well, I was supporting our colleagues. There was Angus there from Nottingham University and Bernardo from the University of Santiago de Cuba. And I joined them to help with the fieldwork, looking at the wild populations, trying to assess how well they were doing, particularly looking for the rarest species, which is Polymeter sulphurosa. And then also we have a lot of experience here in keeping snails in captivity. So we were giving some advice on how they might improve the ways of keeping them over there. Maybe in the future we'd be looking at bringing some out to London Zoo, but that's a later stage. At the moment, we're trying to support the in-country efforts.
We're seeing the pictures and the spectacular shells that they have. Tell me more about why these snails have evolved in the way they have.
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, they are incredible, and it was amazing to see them in the wild, sort of as they should be. But of course, it's their beauty which makes them so rare. As to why they're so brightly coloured, there have been some theories that maybe predators can't zoom in on a particular marking to try and eat them all. So being so varied, they're not so easy to predate. But that's the kind of work that Angus is working on at the university. Certainly our expertise, we've been keeping very rare species of snails, particularly Polynesian tree snails, many of which are extinct in the wild, here at London Zoo for decades now. And that's part of our conservation breeding work. So we wanted to help with some of that expertise to see if that can be applied to these fantastic Cuban snails.
I suppose the basic difficulty here is that in terms of conservation, the basic threat is a human one because of their beauty, and there's only a limited amount you can do about that in terms of laws and sorts of sanctions around that, let alone your sort of work.
Well, yes, but they're also well known in Cuba itself, and so there's a lot of really good conservation work going on in Cuba already, and making people aware of the snails and as a sort of symbol of Cuba, because they are unique to Cuba. Cuba has an amazing number of endemic snail species, and this is like the poster boy for them all, I suppose. But it's just encouraging people to do what they can to support that conservation effort and try and avoid anybody making money out of them. I mean, the weird thing was we were out there trying to conserve them, and at one point someone tried to sell us some shells. So it is still an active problem.
Yeah. That's a particularly telling line that you give us. Really briefly, I mean, is it impossible that these snails could exist elsewhere?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, there's I think there's 1,000 endemic snails on Cuba. It's a biological hotspot for particularly snails, and they're only found in eastern Cuba as well, and some species only in tiny areas within that. So that endemism, that speciality to Cuba, they won't be found anywhere else, and we've got to protect them.
Hence your work and the valuable work it is. Dave, we have to leave it there. We're coming to the end of this segment of the programme. Thanks for joining us on a fascinating story. That's Dave Clark from the Zoological Society of London. I'm back with all the latest from Gaza here in just a moment or two. Live from London, this is BBC News. Israel's Prime Minister is reported to be considering expanding military operations in Gaza, despite growing domestic criticism, including many former defence chiefs. The brother of one of the hostages shown in a video released by Hamas over the weekend tells the BBC of his horror.
Seeing those images of my brother as a human skeleton, we understood it's a new kind of cruelty. It's worse than the Taliban, than Al-Qaeda, worse than ISIS. It's the lowest you can get.
Meanwhile, the Hamas-run health ministry says 5 more people have died of malnutrition in Gaza in the last 24 hours. Our other main headlines. Amber alert and train cancellations as Storm Flores hits part of the UK, with a danger to life warning in Scotland. With small boat crossings at record levels, the UK government promises an extra £100 million to tackle people smuggling gangs. And India win a nail-biting 5th test against England by 6 runs to draw an incredible series. Hello and welcome to Verified Live. We start in Gaza and the pressure building on Benjamin Netanyahu to bring the war to an end. The main hostage support group in Israel has accused the Prime Minister of leading the country and their loved ones to doom after reports emerged that he wants to expand military operations in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu says he will bring together his security cabinet this week to discuss the next steps and war goals. The families say they want a ceasefire deal, and the calls from within Israel are getting louder. Well, Hamas released a propaganda video over the weekend of an emaciated hostage being held in Gaza, and a warning: you may find the following picture distressing. Well, this image was taken from the video where Eviatar David is also seen digging a grave in an underground tunnel. Well, we begin this out with an interview with his brother, who spoke to the BBC.
He's a human skeleton. He was being starved to the point where he can be dead at any moment. And he suffers a great deal. He barely can speak, he barely can move. He's in that point. So we have to be so focused on delivering the message, which is Eviatar is dying. We need to give him medicine. We need to give him food, proper food, and he needs to get this treatment now, or else he will die. And all the leaders of the world should unite in that message right now to save Eviatar, to save the hostages from the cruel, twisted hands of Hamas. Seeing those images of my brother as a human skeleton, we understood it's a new kind of cruelty. It's worse than the Taliban, than Al-Qaeda, worse than ISIS. It's the lowest you can get. My parents are shattered. My father can't sleep. My mom cries all day. My sister, somehow, my younger sister, fighting alongside me. When they watched the video, and my father could barely recognize his own son's voice.
Well, Israel's Prime Minister has been speaking about that and the wider war. Benjamin Netanyahu was speaking during a cabinet meeting today about the next steps in Israel's military offensive.
We need to continue standing together, fighting together, in order to achieve all the war objectives we have set: the defeat of the enemy, the release of our hostages, and ensuring that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel.
Well, Hugo Pacheco, our Middle East correspondent, was listening to that. He gave me this update from Jerusalem.
Well, Matthew, there has been a statement by the Prime Minister's office saying that the Cabinet will convene later this week to guide the military on how to achieve the 3 goals of the war in Gaza. And these are to defeat Hamas, free the hostages, and also ensure that Gaza no longer poses a threat. So this was a statement that was released by the Prime Minister's office. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure internationally. internationally, including from some of Israel's main allies because of the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza. But there's also domestic pressure on the Prime Minister, particularly after those videos with two of the hostages who remain in captivity in Gaza, Eviatar Davi and Rom Braslavsky. Images, of them emaciated, shocking images of the hostages that sparked, an angry reaction in Israel, and particularly from the families of the hostages. 20 hostages are in captivity in Gaza and are believed to be alive, and their relatives are saying that time is running out to save them, and they've been putting a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister to strike a deal with Hamas. They believe that time is running out to save them. So a lot of pressure from all sides on the Prime Minister, and obviously there is also a lot of pressure from some of those hardline members of his governing coalition who have threatened to quit the government if there is any kind of deal with Hamas. So the Prime Minister has been for a very long time accused of not really wanting to strike a deal to end the war in Gaza, to guarantee the survival of his governing coalition. But now things do seem to be different, particularly because of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and now after the release of these videos showing two hostages in a very difficult situation.
Well, that was Hugo Bachega. Let's speak live to Dr. H.A. Hellier, Senior Associate Fellow at the security think tank RUSI. Welcome once again to the programme. Give me your assessment, first of all, of Israel's Prime Minister saying he's now going to expand military operations.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Always a pleasure to be on the program. I think this is really a negotiation tactic that Netanyahu is trying to put out there. Anybody that thinks that he hasn't been waging a devastating war on Gaza for much of the past 22 months has obviously not been paying a great deal of attention. The idea that now he's going to start something, I think, took a lot of observers by surprise, as though this wasn't already going on. Over the last couple of weeks, you've had increasing calls from within Israeli society to describe what Israel is doing in Gaza as genocide. So that you've gotten that from the former Attorney General, you've gotten that from human rights groups like B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights. Israel, I don't think anybody thinks that he's not already waging a massive combative operation on Gaza, one that has taken tens of thousands of lives
Yes.
and doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon anyway.
The hostage families, though, are alarmed, and we read a couple of the quotes out. But let me read you a quote from The Economist Middle East correspondent who tweeted earlier today, Biden's team made the same mistake Witkoff is currently making under Trump, which is trusting Netanyahu to negotiate in good faith and believing he cares about the fate of the hostages. Do you share that, essentially, the question mark he is posing there?
I do. I would put an extra sort of point to this, which I know the correspondent you're referring to, Greg Karlstrom. I think that there's another issue here, which is I don't know if Witkoff doesn't know what's going on. I think that it's clear to anybody who's been watching this file over almost 2 years that Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet have sabotaged, and particularly Netanyahu himself, but they have sabotaged negotiations multiple times since early on in this war. I don't think that anybody who's been watching this can't really be aware of that and understand that that's the case on the ground.
But given what you've just said, do you get the sense then that Trump is about to adapt, change, tweak strategy?
No, I think that actually it's been pretty clear since Trump came into office that essentially Netanyahu has free reign on a broader level, has free reign. There might be particular things here and there, but on the broad strategy, I think that Netanyahu has a free reign. What we've seen over the past couple of months are repeated statements by different ministers in the Israeli cabinet that they intend to force Palestinians to go from the north, concentrate them, like literally they use the word concentrate them in a camp. Again, words that the Israelis are using themselves in the south. So basically put Palestinians into a concentration camp in the south, near to the border with Egypt, with the express purpose of trying to get them to leave. They will not be allowed to leave that camp unless they leave the Gaza Strip altogether. So this is very expressly said. It's very plainly said. What they're going to do, because they have actually already been doing it over the past almost 2 years now.
A wider point, because you wrote a fascinating piece in the Financial Times and you said recognition of Palestinian.
As I wrote the piece to the Oslo process. The Oslo process did not include accountability and penalties for those that did not adhere to the process and broke international law. As a result, during the Oslo process, you saw Israel actually settle and colonize huge swathes of the West Bank in ways that they hadn't done before. And of course, its law are actually penalized, and where there is a cost and a price that the transgressor has to be made to feel in order to stop them from transgressing against its inhabitants, then I'm afraid that recognition would simply be a virtue signal. Yeah. It can't be allowed to be that. There must be consequences for anybody and any entity on any side.
To get the aid in now as we speak, we talked last week and there was that headline that said anything that's not action is simply noise. Do you understand what the delay is here?
The delay isn't that there's not a demand. There is a demand, and the demand has been repeated ad nauseum, not just over the past week, not just the past few weeks, but they need to be made to feel that if they do not open the border for trucks to come in, whether it be from Rafah or anywhere else, and of course the Israelis are in control of all of the border.
Trump urging him to pressure their own government to end the war. The signatories include former heads of Mossad and Shin Bet security services and 3 former military chiefs of staff. Well, in their letter, they say Hamas is no longer...
We see, without any advice or pressure from the American president, but the facts on the ground are that in the last few weeks, President Trump is the one that bring together these different sides. Big successes in against Hamas in Gaza, against Hezbollah in the north, against others in the area, including Iran and so on. But we ask ourselves...
Just on the storms here in a moment or two, but around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Strong winds and heavy rains for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England and parts of Wales. An amber weather warning is in place for most of Scotland, where high winds could pose a danger to life, with gusts of to services. Aer Lingus flights have been cancelled and ferry crossings have been suspended. On the roads, there are hazardous conditions, with Police Scotland warning drivers to avoid unnecessary travel.
Yes, well, for this much of the day for this part of the northeast corner, we've been looking towards the rest of Scotland, knowing that Storm Florence would be making her way here. And in the last time, this is Peterhead Harbour, and it's on a Monday. So Mondays are usually quite a quiet day for the harbour because the boats are usually out, but they're all tied up. They're deciding to tie up rather than brave the North Sea today in these weather conditions. Now, Storm Florence has been having a huge impact on travel across Scotland today. There have been no trains north of the Central Belt. There have been disruption to ferries, to buses, and trees, which are usually in full bloom this time of the year, are being brought down on roads, and that's causing avoid driving unless they have to and to plan ahead. Also, there are disruption to the flights as well, with some flights cancelled or delayed too. Today, including in the capital in Edinburgh, where the Edinburgh Tattoo has been cancelled tonight for the first time in 75 years. There have been lots of other events across the city cancelled too. And even here in the northeast of Scotland, the Turriff Show had to be cancelled as well. We're also seeing some power cuts across Scotland, across the whole of Scotland, but in disruption to the rail to the mail service. Royal Mail in the last hour has said that some of the exam results for Scottish students that was in South Uist. For context, in Scotland, the strongest gusts in August have been 87 miles an hour, so we could get there yet today. We could even get there here. And yellow weather warning will remain in place in the Northern Isles until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Rachel, you've done remarkably well bringing us right up to date. I'm going to let you get in and get some shelter. So thank you very much. And you can see absolutely from those pictures just the sorts of gusts that they are experiencing there. Thanks so much. Let's turn to cricket now. And India have beaten England by 6 runs in a dramatic Test match special for BBC Radio 5 Live Sports Extra. And welcome here to the programme. Wow, what a finish that was.
Yes, it was very, very exciting. It's hugely dramatic. Would only likely be watching about sort of 40 minutes to an hour of cricket, but everybody who turned up, I don't think they'd be begrudging it at all. It was very exciting, a thrilling climax, a fittingly thrilling climax to what had been a very exciting. They did. I mean, when Harry Brook and Joe Root were batting, it looked like a foregone conclusion that England would win. England would win yesterday with plenty of time to spare. The Indian bowlers at the time seemed to have no one. They helped. India knew what they had to do. They had to just take 3, maybe 4 England wickets today. And as you say, the heroics from Chris Woakes, I mean, it was really magnificent. Quite the sight, really, to see him coming out, one arm in a sling. It was quite frightening, actually, really, because you're sort of worried about the prospect of him having to face a ball. He didn't have to in the end, as it turned out, but it certainly was a heroic effort, and he was given a huge rapturous ovation by the crowd.
Across the series, and it's been an incredible series. What have been the highlights for you?
It's been a phenomenal test series for sure. As you say, Suraj, great performance, great heart shown by him yesterday and today as well. The one that stays with me, though, is Joe Root becoming the 2nd highest run scorer in the history of Test cricket. Only 2,500 runs or so, or change, behind Sachin Tendulkar, a record that he may well claim in the coming years as well. That's probably the big one for me. But Shubman Gill, scoring 700+ runs in his first series as captain of India. A phenomenal start for him to that part of his career as well. There's just too many things. There were so many moments of drama that made this series so enthralling, and one of the reasons people are talking about a resurgence of interest in Test cricket.
Well, I mean, Ben Stokes said exactly that. He said Test cricket is going nowhere. And actually, one thing that I sort of noticed from watching Test match cricket from my childhood is the mindset from captains. They are no longer cautious.
Stokes and Brendan McCullum became sort of the management of the England team. They've always been very positive, very attacking. They've chased down more totals in excess of sort of 400 than any other team in the 4th innings I think a lot of teams around the world are looking to follow, because they've seen that, with that comes a lot of interest from fans.
Atif, the music is playing, but it's been an extraordinary Test match today. 20 minutes.
Amid Mr. Trump's threatened crackdown on Russian energy.
The man from Del Monte says yes.
And an iconic ad for a once beloved Tesla shares are on the rise this Monday after a move that will make the world's richest man, well, a lot richer. Tesla has granted its boss, Elon Musk, 96 million new shares. That's worth nearly $30 billion. All of that in a bid to keep him at the helm of the company. Now, it comes after a Delaware court voided a $50 billion pay package last year as being unfair to shareholders. Concerns about Mr. Musk's political stance. Let's talk to Michelle, our North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury, who is standing by in New York. And it's quite a payday, Michelle, isn't it?
It certainly is. Been caught in legal limbo. This is after a Delaware judge ruled that the compensation was unfair and stopped the company from paying him what would have been at the time a $50 billion compensation. So they're giving him a huge number of shares, which he can buy for around $23 a share. That's the price he would have been able to buy them back in 2018. But of course, today they're valued a company. Increasingly, people see robo-taxis and robots as the future of the company, and they want to make sure that Mr. Musk is there to oversee it.
Yeah, it's what they needed to do because the Delaware soap scene in terms of that Delaware soap opera.
You mentioned the soap opera. That has meant that Elon Musk hasn't been paid since 2018. Obviously, this is a way forward. Political party, sales are down, share prices under pressure. Many people will be looking at this wondering, well, is he worth it?
Look, I mean, I get the question, and me and you have talked about this before. I mean, I believe when it comes to the AI revolution, and I believe Tesla is one of the best AI companies out there, Musk is key to the whole thing. The board recognizes this. And look, this is an arms race in terms of what's going on for AI. And you cannot have Musk sort of semi-committed. I think the board needed to do this. I think they'll have another pay package at the November shareholder meeting. And I think this is what investors want to see from Musk to recommit to Tesla. The board did their part.
That was Dan Ives from Wedbush Securities speaking to me earlier. And I think that Elon Musk falls into that sort of exceptional category of CEO, Ben. If you think of Steve Jobs at Apple or Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, where the fortunes of these companies, Meta, I should say, the fortunes of these companies are so intertwined with these individuals that shareholders and the board are willing to pay a premium to make sure they remain engaged.
Michelle, thank you. Good to talk to you. Michelle Fleury there live in New York with the very latest on that. But we're going to stay in the US and President Trump's trade war because in the last few minutes, Mr. Trump has threatened to increase tariffs on India over its continued purchase of Russian oil. But what's the economic impact all of those tariffs is having on the United States is still up for debate. On Friday, investors were rattled by a US jobs report that came in much worse than expected. Well, the president moved quickly to fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Today, he's claimed again on Truth Social, that's his social media network, that the payroll data was, quote, rigged. But researchers at Yale say that tariffs will hit household incomes and jobs. Let's talk to Martha Gimbel, who's Executive Director at the Budget Lab of Yale. Good to have you here. And so President Trump says, look, the numbers are wrong. Is he right?
No. You know, the numbers you saw that came in relatively weak that had these revisions, you know, is keeping is in keeping with other economic data that we've seen, has followed the totally standard data collection techniques. And so he just got a number that he didn't like, and he got mad, which many of us have gotten numbers that we didn't like and been upset about it. Most of us did not then fire the BLS commissioner in response.
Yes, and that's the challenge here. A lot of people have suggested that these tariffs will add to inflation. They will cause problems for the domestic US economy. Some of your numbers do stack up to that as well. Politically, that's not palatable for him. And this is just straight out of his playbook, though, isn't it? If he doesn't like it, go on the attack.
I mean, I think it's a real problem to be going after these numbers. It is impossible to overstate the quality of the numbers that come out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, how much they are admired, not just in the United States, but internationally. U.S. economic data historically has been considered a gold standard. I also want to point out that if you're talking about executives who have fired or gone after statistical agencies, you start talking about countries like Venezuela, Argentina. Those are not countries that one usually associates with the United States, and it's certainly not countries that you want to be in company with when it comes to economic management.
So talk me through some of your numbers, because you've been putting an assessment together of what these tariffs will do for the US economy in all different aspects, be it jobs or economic growth. What do those numbers tell you?
Yeah, so our numbers show that the tariffs will slow down economic growth, not necessarily enough to lead to a recession, but a slowdown, and will cause prices to rise. This is not a controversial take. This is very common among economists. What we have found is that at the end of this year, we expect GDP growth to be about 0.5 percentage point lower than we would expect it to be otherwise, and for costs to households to be about $2,000 higher.
Where does all of this leave America's credibility? That if, as you touched on, there's an organisation that compiles official numbers, be them for economic growth, maybe for inflation, maybe for the number of jobs that have been created or not. If the president has the power to fire the person running those authorities, where does it leave America's credibility?
It's not ideal. The Economist had a graph they put out a while ago looking at official data versus private sector data. And what you saw was that in freer countries, those numbers pretty much aligned, whereas in more autocratic countries, those numbers started to diverge. If you look at the United States in recent months, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has said we've added about 500,000 jobs. ADP, our private payroll provider, says it's about 400,000. So at the moment, official sources and private sources tend to agree, and we'll just have to see where that leaves us moving forward.
Yes, good to talk to you, Martha. Thank you. Martha Gimbel there, Executive Director at the Budget Lab at Yale. Thank you. Let's turn our attention, though, now to the price of oil, because crude has fallen by more than $1 a barrel after falling $2 on Friday. This all after OPEC Plus, that's the oil cartel, agreed to pump more oil at a meeting on Sunday. It confirms reports that were out last week. Well, the increase in the oil cartel's production targets by over 500,000 barrels a day will come into effect next month. But what does it all mean? Well, we've been speaking to Carol Nachler, who's the boss, the chief executive of Crystal Energy, and she said Gulf countries simply want to capture more market share from US shale producers. But they're also concerned about the president's plans to crack down on countries that buy oil from Russia. That could reduce supplies. Well, in the last half hour, he's threatened to substantially increase, quote, tariffs on India over the issue.
I think this is also playing an important role behind OPEC Plus decision, because Russia is a very important player, the third largest producer in the world after the US and Saudi Arabia. And therefore, if the US goes ahead with its threats and introduce secondary sanctions on Russian oil, which means it would target its buyers, the likes of India and China. We already saw Indian refineries have kind of paused and delays receiving deliveries from Russian sellers. That would impact supply significantly. That would cause disruptions in the market, especially if it is combined with a tougher enforcement of sanctions on Iran. So in this sense, OPEC Plus is kind of preempting potential losses in the supply if the geopolitics turn nasty again.
Carol Nachler there. Now, who remembers the man from Del Monte?
It takes well over a year for a pineapple to reach perfect ripeness. The man from Del Monte knows that moment.
The man from Del Monte says yes.
Now, if you're of a certain age, you will remember that ad campaign. It was from the 1980s. But now, Del Monte Foods, a company that's 138 years old, it faces a bankruptcy hearing in New Jersey today. It's battling to restructure its business. So where did it all go wrong? Well, Jitendra Serev is a branding expert. Take a listen.
It's kind of surprising, you know, we do remember the man from Del Monte. He was iconic, he was theatrical, he embodied the brand values of the organization. And most importantly, he would say yes, and audiences would listen back then. But I think what we've seen now is that audiences have changed. You know, they've become savvier, they've become more discerning. We've seen social media come into play, food as identity, all these different things are changing the way food brands in particular need to communicate with their audiences. You know, you have a changing dynamic and you need to actually radically reimagine these heritage brands for a radically new audience in Generation Z. You know, younger audiences, they think and feel very differently. I mean, was Del Monte prepared for social media? No, but were some of its competitors? Heinz, Campbell, you know, doing all these interesting contests, going viral on social media, on TikTok, the new recipe book.
We'll keep you posted on that as we hear more from that court in New Jersey. But let me bring you up to date with some of our other main stories that we're following. And thousands of workers in Boeing's defence business are due to contracts after weeks of wrangling. Around 3,200 employees at facilities in Missouri and Illinois are expected to join the walkout. Boeing said it was disappointed but had contingency plans in place. Total compensation for UK motorists who were missold car finance could be as high as £18 billion, according to the Financial Conduct Authority. The announcement of the figure is much lower than Singh has pleaded guilty to a charge connected to the landmark corruption scandal that engulfed the country last year. Mr. Singh has admitted to obstruction of justice by helping the former Transport Minister cover up evidence. There's more on all those stories for you. bbc.com/business is where you will find it, but that is your business today. See you soon.
Thousands of people have come here to the centre of Seoul this evening. They have come to celebrate the newly elected president, Lee Jae-myung.
He's been firing rubber bullets. Of the attacks we've seen over the past 48 hours, it doesn't feel like we're in ceasefire territory.
There when the story breaks. BBC News.
They've occupied since 1877. But there are significant opposition to the plans, both from local residents and from pro-democracy activists who fear China could use it to hold and harass political Grammaticus has written an in-depth piece on this story for BBC News. It is on the website and I'll put a link to it in a moment or two. But Damien, let's take it in stages. Tell me a little more about the building, the size of it, the location of it.
Well, it's right at the heart of a historic part of London. So it is literally across the road, Matthew, from the Tower of London. The Tower of London, part of which built by William the Conqueror, so 1,000 years ago. Huge tourist site. Kings and queens of England lived there for centuries. Right across the road is where the coins of the realm used to be produced at the Royal Mint. That moved out, and that site was bought by China for £250 million, and it wants to redevelop it. So have 200 staff in there. It would be the biggest embassy in Europe. And literally from there, you can stand and look across the road, not just at the tower, but at the skyscrapers of the banks of the City of London. And under that area run a lot of the cables that carry fibre optic communications linking those banks to the outside world, including a telephone exchange for the City of London that sits right on the site that China wants to surround with its new embassy. And many people fear, or amongst the opponents and some politicians, that China will be able to hack into those cable communications and eavesdrop on the City of London. That's one of the objections.
I'll come back to some of the other objections in a moment, and espionage and other concerns, but you start that in-depth piece with an exchange, an interview and an account from a pro-democracy activist. So tell me that story, and our viewers that story.
Yeah, so there is this group of people who are extremely concerned about this embassy because of what's known as transnational repression. So China's Communist Party extending its reach overseas to try to silence critics. And among those, now in the UK, you have a large number of people who have left Hong Kong, in some cases, like this woman, Carmen Lau. She's 30 years old. She was a local politician in Hong Kong. China passed a new law in Hong Kong as it was clamping down there, and it wanted all local politicians to swear an oath of the activists were being arrested, so she fled to the UK. There are now tens of thousands of Hong Kongers who've moved here, and people like her fear that they could be targeted by agents from within bounty letters, so letters of wanted notices with her photo offering a reward of $1 million Hong Kong dollars, almost £100,000, for information about her, or be outside. And she said that she really thinks the UK government should think carefully about giving a site like this, China, access to a site like this. The embassy, I have to say, says that this is scaremongering, and that its aim is to further Chinese-UK ties.
Well, exactly on that point, let's go full circle. You started by talking about some of the concerns. Take me through. And certainly from the UK side of some of the risks, but of course there's also a desire to boost trade.
Yes, there is, and there is a diplomatic convention that you should assist other countries reaching out to China, the Labour government reaching out to China to try to encourage trade, seen as important. One of the government's missions here is to boost growth. That's been having a tough time doing that. So that would be one reason to seek good ties with China and improve ties with China. But then you also have this sort of broad view of the difficulties of managing a relationship with China. So you have senior people who've been advising the government over years and years saying that when it comes to China, yes, you want to improve trade. Like the pandemic is an